Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I'm Robbie Rhino, and in today's video I'm going to be doing a guide on the Tiran 4, which is an Era 1 medium tank for the Independent Alliance inside the Cold War game mode. It's a middle era Era 1 medium tank, meaning you get to this via the starting tank inside the Independent Alliance tech tree, the M50 Sherman, and it leads on to the Tiran 5SH, which will be the last Era 1 Independent Alliance tank before you go on into Era 2. So we're going to have a look at the stats of the Tiran 4 and compare to quite a few of its competitors here over on Excel. We're going to be comparing to the Type 69-2, the T-54, the Type 59 and the Object 165, all Era 1 tanks, very similar in terms of their hit points and their mobility and their guns. So it's going to be a good indication of how the Tiran 4 holds up against its competition. We'll have a little bit of a look at my commander and equipment setup and how that affects the stats. We'll have a look at the armor profile, which is pretty good news for the Tiran 4, and then I've got gameplay for you, time-stamped at the end if you wish just to skip forward towards the gameplay to see how this thing performs and how I try and get the most out of it, get the most XP, and get towards that Tiran 5SH as quickly as possible. Just a quick note before we go on to the stats of the Tiran 4, I'm trying to build up a nice resource of guides and reviews of most of the tanks inside the Cold War game mode and quite a few inside the World War II game mode, which is why these longer videos are happening more frequently, but they'll always be time-stamped and you can skip forward to whatever section you wish at any time. It really doesn't bother me. I'm just happy to provide the content, and any support is greatly appreciated, and there'll still be shorter videos coming out with different themes in between. So here on Excel, orange is the stat which is somewhere in the middle, green is the best, red is the worst, and yellow is highlighted, and that means my commander and equipment setup has been applied, and I'll talk you through that in just a little bit. But the Tiran 4, we're going to start with the hit points, 1900 hit points, somewhere in the middle. It beats the Type 69-2 and T-54 by 50 hit points, but it's 50 less than the Type 59. An Object 165. Plenty of hit points to take between sort of 3 and 5 rounds depending on what caliber gun is shooting at you, and you have some pretty decent armor on this tank, so it should be fairly resilient on the battlefield. And view range doesn't matter too much because of the playstyle of the Tiran 4, but 455 meters, not quite as good as the Type 69-2. It's the same as the Object 165, and it beats the T-54 and Type 59. So it's pretty good news so far for the Tiran 4. How about the mobility? Well, as you can see, a lot of it highlighted in red and some in orange, meaning it does fall behind its competitors in quite a few aspects here in terms of the mobility. You have an engine power on the Tiran 4 of 580, a power to weight ratio of 16.34, a top forward speed of 58.2 kilometers an hour, and a top reverse speed of 22.5 kilometers an hour. In terms of your traverse speeds, a pretty decent whole traverse speed at 42 degrees a second, but your turret does move very slowly at 30 degrees a second. However, you can improve that with gun handling skills, and I'll tell you how I got to that figure a little bit later on. But what does that mean in terms of this comparison? Well, as you can see, Type 69-2 is king in terms of mobility, in terms of its power to weight, engine power, top forward and reverse speed. However, the Tiran 4 does beat it in terms of its whole traverse, and it has the same turret traverse. And with the other tanks in this comparison, it's pretty much similar. The T-54 has better traverse speed on its hull and turret, but only by a small margin. So apart from the Type 69-2, it's got relatively decent mobility. You're going to get to where you need to be on the battlefield in enough time to play the supporting role that this tank kind of has to play, and I'll tell you why it has to play that as we get on to talk about the gun. So the Tiran 4, a 100mm gun on the Tiran 4 with 320 alpha damage on its standard APCR rounds and its premium heat rounds, and if you use the HE rounds, 420 alpha damage. In terms of the shell velocity, it's the same speed for all of the rounds, 895 meters a second, very slow indeed. So you do have to practice giving a little bit more lead than you would in some of the other tanks, as you'll see in this comparison. Penetration wise, 219mm on your standard APCR, which is worse than the M50 Sherman, so you actually have a downgrade in terms of the penetration on this tank, even when you're fully upgraded, so definitely watch out for that. But you do have some fairly juicy heat rounds at 330mm, and although heat is relatively hard to use inside the Cold War game mode, it's easier to use in Era 1 than in Era 2 and Era 3, so you definitely can make use of that, especially over distance, because you won't lose penetration with heat, whereas you will with APCR. And you have HE rounds with 50mm of penetration, which you definitely can penetrate quite a few of the rears of tanks, and especially some of the lightly armoured light tanks. So in terms of this comparison, as you can see, it has the worst shell velocity in this comparison. Same with the T-54 895 meters a second. It has the joint worst standard penetration at 219mm, the same as the T-54, and the Type 59 has a little bit worse at 215mm. Whereas, as you can see, the Object 165 has 264mm of standard penetration, much better than the Tiran 4, and the Type 69-2 is king with 276mm of penetration. However, all of these tanks have pretty much the same premium penetration, apart from the Type 59, which fires APCR as its secondary ammunition choice, and that is 265mm of penetration. So standard penetration, it's bad for a free-to-play player. It's very hard to penetrate at mid to long ranges, but I'll try and tell you how I get around that in the gameplay. In terms of its alpha damage, it's the same as on the Type 69-2, the T-54 and the Object 165, and the Type 59 320mm. That is all 100mm guns in this comparison. In terms of the HE rounds, it has the worst or joint worst with the T-54 alpha damage, whereas the Type 69-2 and the Object 165 have 470. God knows why they have more. They're the same caliber gun. It's just a little bit unfortunate for the Tiran 4, but the overall take home from the initial look at the gun: poor standard penetration, poor shell velocity, fairly decent premium heat rounds if you're able to penetrate heat in Era 1, and it does lack in terms of its penetration compared to the Type 69-2 and the Object 165, but it is comparable to the T-54 and the Type 59. So now we're going to get on into the gun handling, and this is where it might be a little bit better for the Tiran 4. You have an aim time of 2.1 seconds, an accuracy of 0.37, a DPM of 2,429, which means you reload for one shell base in 7.9 seconds. You have 50 rounds of ammunition, the same as every other tank in this comparison, 6 degrees of gun depression and 20 degrees of gun elevation. So as you can see, it doesn't have the worst aim time. That goes to the Type 59 at 2.3 seconds. But it is 0.1 second off of the best, which is the Object 165, but 2.1 seconds isn't too bad at all. And with a good commander and equipment setup, you definitely can get that down. In terms of the accuracy, as you can see, it's worse than the Type 69-2 and T-54. It's better than the Type 59, but only by 0.01, and it's not as good as the Object 165, which has 0.34, and that is the best in this comparison. So we're highlighting that in green instead of orange, as it should be the best highlighted in green. In terms of the DPM then, 2,429. As you can see, that beats the Type 69-2 by a little bit. It beats the T-54 by some way, and it's exactly the same as the gun on the Type 59, so 2,429 DPM. However, not quite as good as the Object 165, which has 2,493. So you're going to keep up with quite a lot of tanks of the same level in Era 1, but you will get outshot by many different tanks, so watch out for that. In terms of your gun depression, not quite as bad as the worst in this comparison, which is the Type 69-2 at 4 degrees, but 6 degrees can be very awkward to use, as you'll see in the gameplay. You've got to try and find the smallest ridgelines you can try and get hold down on and still use your gun depression. It's the same as the gun depression on the T54 and on the Object 165, and the best goes to the Type 59, which has 1 degree more at 7 degrees of gun depression. And lastly, in terms of the gun elevation, it does have the joint best, along with the T54 and the Type 59, and the worst goes to the Type 69 too, and Object 165 at 17 degrees. 20 degrees of gun elevation on the Tiran 4 is more than enough to use in many different scenarios. So what is the overall take home from these stats as we look at them now? Fairly decent hit points, view range fairly decent again, mobility not quite as good as the best of the middle era 1 medium tanks, but it is comparable to quite a lot of the others. Your hold traverse is pretty good and your turret traverse is slow, but that will be boosted up by gun handling skills. You have a fairly good alpha damage at 320, but very poor shell velocity and standard penetration, so you definitely have to aim for your weak spots and try and flank where possible. Pretty good aim time. Accuracy isn't great, but you can get that down to a reasonable level, and it's in line with the other tanks in this comparison. You have enough ammunition to last a battle. 6 degrees of gun depression can be very awkward. Takes a bit of getting used to, as does shooting with that slow shell velocity, and gun elevation joint best in this comparison. So that's the overall take home. So what about my commander and equipment setup, and what do I run on the Tiran 4? Well, in terms of my equipment, I've chosen to run improved ventilation, advanced loader and gun stabilizer. And on my commander, I run 6 cents, born leader, rapid loading, steady aim, rapid aim, snapshot, run and gun, armor angling and track mechanic. So in terms of my equipment, I run the improved ventilation to help out with the DPM, the gun handling and the aim time, advanced loader to help the DPM out as much as possible to make use of that 320 alpha damage, and gun stabilizer to improve that pretty poor accuracy. And with my commander skill, 6 cents and born leader, I run a standard on every single one of my commanders. Rapid loading to help the DPM, and then I run the 4 gun handling perks, including run and gun, to make this as accurate as possible. Armor angling, I run as I'm using this crew on some heavy tanks as well, and it's always nice to reduce the damage you receive by 5%. And track mechanic, to keep my tracks on, as this tank is relatively good at side scraping, as we'll have a look at the armor profile in just a little bit. So that's why I run track mechanic, to keep me going, and because you don't want to be caught out in the open because you want the fastest era 1 medium tank. So that's it for the stats and the commander and equipment setup. How does that affect the stats of the Tiran 4? Well, if you choose to run the same commander and equipment setup as me, you're looking at a view range of 484 meters, which isn't too bad at all, and that turret traverse will have improved to 35.61 degrees a second. That's much better than the base 30 degrees a second. And if you choose to run the same setup as me, your aim time is now 1.97 seconds. You have an accuracy of 0.31, and your DPM would have jumped up to a nice 3,248. That's not too bad at all for a supporting style medium tank, which means I now have 5.91 second reload for that 320 alpha damage, so not too bad at all. So that's it for the stats of the Tiran 4. We're now going to head over to the garage, have a look at the armor profile of the Tiran 4, see how useful it is. Then we're going to get stuck into the gameplay, so I'll see you over in the garage shortly. So we're now in the garage having a look at the armor profile of the Tiran 4, and it's actually quite good news for the Tiran 4. It's quite durable. You have the ability to bounce quite a few shells, especially from tanks that are starting tanks in Era 1, or tanks that have poor penetration like the Tiran 4 or the Type 59, and quite a few of the light tanks. So the thickest part of the armour is here over the mantlet underneath the gun at 200mm, and as you can see, this does have a rounded turret like the T54 and Type 59, so there's going to be a slightly better effective angle than the 200mm, and that's enough in itself to bounce quite a few rounds. If you are on a sort of small ridgeline and you're using the full extent of your 6 degrees of gun depression and they only have your turret to shoot at, you will bounce quite a few shells from lower tiered Era 1 tanks. However, the higher tiered Era 1 tanks will definitely butcher the front of your turret, so you do have to watch out for that. And you do have a cupola people can shoot, but that's relatively effective. And then you have these bands here, 170mm, 160mm to the left and right of the mantlet there. Side to the turret 155mm, but of course that is rounded and sloped back. So again, if you're on a ridgeline and you're wiggling your turret side to side, you have the chance that they're going to auto ricochet off the side of your turret. And then you have these 150mm banding here around the mid of the turret. So turret is pretty decent. You just have this cupola and the one on the left, which is able to be shot when you are hull down because you don't have too much gun depression. 6 degrees is around there, so they're always going to be visible, and that is a good weak spot to hit. If you are struggling to pen this tank with poor penetration, definitely go for the cupolas to the left and right 130mm. Some more bounding around the turret, and here we have the upper and lower plate at 100mm. That isn't great at all. If you're angled at kind of a 45-degree angle, poor penetration definitely will bounce off of the upper plate and the lower plate, but dead on people will butcher the front of this tank, so you're going to want to move and wiggle at the same time and try and bait people into shooting the sides of your tank and the tracks, because that's where the best armour is. And the actual sides of the Tiran 4 are 80mm thick, which means you definitely won't be overmatched by anything you're going to come up against in Era 1. This is a fantastic side scraper. Side scrape something like this round a corner and you should absorb quite a few rounds. Of course, HE will splash damage you and your turret will still be an option for people, but this is the best chance to go around a corner. Side scrape to the left and right, and you should absorb quite a few rounds into your tracks. 80mm of side armour is pretty good indeed. And apart from the good side armour, you do have spaced armour. Tracks themselves are 20mm. You have some spaced armour here, as you can see on the cupola, and you have this 10mm bit, some around the side and on top of the tracks, and another 6mm dotted around the side and the back of the turret to protect against HE rounds. So when you are moving, side scraping, you have the ability to absorb shells sometimes into your sides. And there's a 3mm which won't help too much at all, but the basic take home is get hull down when you can, try and expose as little of your upper plate as possible, side scrape around corners and make your cupolas as hard to hit. You're not going to be deflecting loads and loads around. It's not OP armor, but it's enough to bounce a couple and keep you in the game. You're going to want to be playing a support style gameplay, so yeah, the armor isn't too bad for that. But that's the armor of the Tiran 4. We're now going to get stuck into the first of 3 gameplays. So you're joining me in the first gameplay of today's video. We're 30 seconds into the battle here on Erlenberg. It's a standard battle and we're heading along the 9 and 0 lines, going to defend the northern portion of this map. You can see the mobility isn't too bad at getting into position. A lot of our tanks are still hanging around the base, which is quite normal. There's a lot of new players in Era 1 and people aren't as confident as they are in the higher eras or in the higher tiers inside the World War II game mode. And now we're just going to try and go as quickly as possible and take out this FV-107, who is going to struggle to penetrate our armour, and we should be able to take nice chunks out of that light tank, even with our poor penetration. The T-44A there is showing us his side, and our poor penetration, 219, is still good enough to go through the side of most tanks we're going to come up against. We have found ourselves a nice little position here. When we get into this little nook, we are able to go hull down and just expose our turret. You can see there that even though the turret is relatively strong, it still will be penetrated by tanks that have fairly good penetration or tanks that are able to hit your cupola. as a kind of supporting style gameplay, or how I like to play this tank, I'm always going to go for tracks when people are trying to emerge on hills like that Centurion, try and track them in the open for our teammates, and we're just going to try and put shots in where we can. We're not going to risk our hit points too much. You can see we've already blocked a little bit from the FV107, I believe, and hopefully we can take out this T-44A. That's a starting Eastern Alliance Era 1 medium tank that definitely we can overpower even with our poor penetration. That tank is going to get taken out very quickly with only 1400 hit points, I believe it has. And now we're going to go forward and help our friendly tank here go over, put a shell into the Centurion 2. The Centurion 2 behind it bounces off us, the Centurion 2 in front of us bounces off us, and you can see here that the armour does work, trying to angle at 45 degrees and even down slope, which makes our armour slightly weaker for our opponents. We are bouncing some nice damage here, whilst also putting round after round into the Centurion 2. I'm kind of confident just to sit here for the moment. It doesn't look like the most confident of players. I'm going to rock backwards and forwards and try and keep my repair kit for when I really need it. We have outstayed our welcome though, as this M46A1 does get into a nice hold down position to start putting rounds into us, and you can see that when a tank that has good enough penetration to go through your armour, your hit points don't last too long at all, which is why I carry the enhanced smoke screen there. Pop it and we can fall back a ridgeline and see if we can play a slightly more passive style for a little bit. See if we can use the True Vision system to scan the opposite horizon or the opposite ridgeline here on Erlenberg and get some shots across the map. When we do that, just note how slow the shell velocity is. It's very poor, and you do have to take a little bit of time to get used to the shell velocity with this tank. It's slow, but yeah, it's not too bad a tank. The grind wasn't awful. I've now got to the Tiran 5SH, which does look like it will be a much better tank, as it should be, being the last Independent Alliance Era 1 tank, but it's nothing special. It's just a supporting medium tank. It could definitely be aggressive against starting Era 1 tanks, but tanks with good penetration and Era 1 tanks that are the highest kind of tier in Era 1 definitely will shred you. So you have to pick your battles, know the different positions on the map that you're going to try and go to, and minimise the amount of the hole that your enemies are going to be firing at. I think in this particular gameplay I wasn't fully upgraded. I don't think I had the upgraded engine, so you are seeing this at a limited capacity, and we still have a relatively decent result. We're being slightly more passive now, as we are on a sort of 2-shot for most tanks we're going to come up against, and even a 1-shot for some of the tank destroyers in Era 1. However, I do want to try and clear out this side, so we're now going to swarm this M46A1 and hopefully get some payback for the rounds that he put into us earlier. His focus is to his right, so we're going to come over, auto-aiming from this distance shouldn't be a problem to go through him, and we're going to use our weight to ram him and get a kill there on the M46A1. It might not be the smartest of plays there, as we are definitely now a 1-shot. However, I was confident that this game was definitely ours for the taking. Probably a little bit overconfident, but trying to get that extra XP by getting the kill. And now we can use our mediocre mobility to traverse Erlenberg and try and get to the other side of the map without getting detected and taken out. Just using the buildings to peek around and see what's in the distance. See if we can get some long range fire before we try and make the advance. And when you are advancing over Erlenberg, it's usually better to go right through the middle where the bridge is in E5. If you go to the north or south, it's a much harder trek. You can use the buildings here to sort of hide your advance, and then you can get under the gun line much easier through the middle. That's just something from experience, and it's one way to kind of break the camp, as what usually happens, especially in a standard battle, is a team will sit on the 3 line, a team will sit on the 8 and 9 line on the hills and just snipe with the True Vision system across the map. It's always nice to break that little bit of a camp, and you might get some nice assistance damage as well. Just pinging my teammates there to move up and attack as it's the end of the game. Hopefully we can get some supporting fire from them to add to our pretty decent round. And the numbers in the top right corner pretty much explain what this tank's all about. You bounce a little bit of damage, you've got enough armor to keep you in the game, your gun's good enough to get a pretty decent amount of damage to make an impact, and you can get a little bit of assistance if you play slightly more aggressively in the right scenarios. Now we're just going to flank, use our teammates' distraction and try and take out this last medium tank here in the north, using the 3 view of the camera to just check over the ridgeline, make sure he isn't facing us, pop over, get a nice auto aim shot there into the rear, and then we can move on towards our next target. There's only a heavy tank and a tank destroyer left on the enemy team. We're going to try and stay low, keep our tank hidden. As you can see, it's quite low profile, so it's nice to go around these ridge lines undetected. Just being a little bit careful, trying to get the last remaining bits of XP I can out to maximise my grind towards the Tiran 5SH. This Object 268, a turretless tank destroyer, was turning around, so we had a nice chance there to stop for a bit, get a shot in, pop the smoke screen, then come in from a little bit of a higher location, and hopefully we're going to be able to get a shot through the side. Unfortunately we don't get the damage, but we do track the Object 268 in place, which means we can get the subsequent round in. And now the 268's looking at me. I'm not going to throw my tank away for the sake of it, I'm just going to go backwards and forwards on this ridge line and then come in from a different angle. And it's all about changing up your approaches. When you know people are looking at you, we're not going to bounce around from the Object 268 unless we're incredibly lucky. So we have to try and outthink or outflank the opponents in this scenario, waiting for our teammates to go in, and then hopefully we can get a shot on the remaining heavy tank, which is the M103A1. I got all the letters and numbers in the right place, I hope. And now we're going to use our tank destroyer's distraction, see if we can get a shell into the back of the heavy tank. You saw there the aim time, not fantastic, especially when you've just stopped and you're moving. However, we should still be able to get up behind this heavy tank and put at least one round into him, or be the distraction now, play Ring Around the Rosie around this rock, and we're just distracting this heavy tank enough for our teammates to take him down. I don't want to give him the satisfaction of the kill. And we do cap at the same time as we take out all of the enemy tanks. And for a middle era 1 medium tank that's not fully upgraded, we had a pretty decent result there with a first class mastery, 1692 base experience, 134,000 silver, 3 kills, 5k direct damage, 301 assistance and 1.3k blocked. That's it for the first game. We're now going to head on into the second one. So now you're joining me in the second gameplay of today's video. We're here on my favourite map, Westfield, in the Tiran 4, and in this gameplay we are fully upgraded. This was a game that I played just before I started to make today's video on the Tiran 4. We're going to use this position here in K6 at the start of the battle to snipe towards the central location. It's an encounter battle which usually draws people to the capture circle more than a standard battle or an assault battle. So we're going to stay here, try and get some vision out with the relatively decent view range that we have. And you can see here that with the nice view range and a fully pimped out commander with 9 skills, you were able to do some pretty decent scouting work in this medium tank. And the DPM and this gun are working pretty well. The slow shell velocity is poor, but we're firing at tanks that are going uphill, meaning even I won't miss these shots, hopefully, at these tanks that are in the middle. We've got be a little bit careful about tanks like this Skoda we're firing at in the position in F9, F0 on that bridge. But if we need to cross, we can do so as long as we think that the coast is clear. I get shot from down below. I believe that I have enough time to come out and use the True Vision system to get a shot in. Unfortunately for me, I do take a massive slap I believe that is from an FE 4005 or another tank destroyer, which does leave me on 951 hit points. So I'm going to use that smokescreen I popped to advance forward another ridgeline, and these ridgelines are perfect for a tank like this. I can come up to a ridgeline like this, angle 45 degrees, give them an angled upper plate or just the turret of this tank to shoot at, and it gives me the best possible opportunity to avoid taking damage and hopefully blocking a shot. But at this moment in time, I'm just waiting for my teammates to go through the north and the middle and sort of surround the enemies that look like they're all towards the bridge area and in the centre of the map. And I'm going to pop over and get as many shots in where I feel like it is possible. This M50 Sherman gives me a nice opportunity to get a shot in. We pop over, but we do take a round from the M47. I'm still relatively comfortable in this position, even though it is 10 against 10 at the moment. I just have to be a little bit more passive when I'm going over this ridgeline to get shots in at these two tanks. And I'm just waiting for my teammates to take them out as I make myself the distraction. And it's all about playing this supporting style gameplay. If I'm not the one popping over to get the shots in, I'm going to try and distract the tanks so my teammates can get the damage in. I'm going to spot for my tank destroyers and my heavy tanks, and I'm going to support them if they are the ones pushing forward. I'm going to try and use my armour as effectively as possible, even though it doesn't always work. And we're going to try and put some nice view range out as well. So this Tiran 5SH, which is the tank that we will be going towards, or I have now ground out after I finished my grind today in the Tiran 4. We're going to now bait this Tiran 5SH over this ridgeline. We're at one shot for him. I believe it's 390 alpha damage or more on the Tiran 5SH. So we're going to pop the smoke screen, fall back down the ridgeline and come from a different angle. Hopefully bait him over the ridgeline, and my teammates will be able to mop him up if he comes after me. But in that position there, we got some view range out, got some nice assistance on these tanks that are hiding towards the centre of the map on the bridge area, and we got some nice damage for ourselves. And it's not going to be glorious games all the time in this tank. It's not overpowered. It's not the absolute worst. It's just a nice supporting tank, a fairly easy grind. You've just got to pick your battles, pick your moments, definitely try and fire at mid-range as possible. Long range is difficult with the penetration and the shell velocity. Try and wait till tanks are turned, go for tracks, go for the experience by doing that. And yeah, you should be golden. We're getting view range out still, getting some nice assistance, and we're boosting up our damage total very nice. We bounce off the back of a T-44A there, which frustrates me, but we do reload relatively quickly, and we take him out. And now it's just two medium tanks left, the T-54 and the Tiran 5SH. I notice slightly too late the Tiran 5SH comes after us. We do move our hull around as quickly as possible, try and block the shell. Unfortunately, the poor penetration lets us down there on the side of the 5SH. However, he did come over, got himself killed, and it's just the one remaining enemy tank, which means this one should be a victory. And in a fairly quick battle, we've had a nice impact and a pretty decent result. And if you have results like that, your grind's going to go nice and smoothly. We finish in third place on our team with a nice profit of 120,000 silver, 1,433 base experience points. We pick up 3.9k direct damage, 3 kills and 1,600 assistance. So yeah, not too bad a game there. And that again just shows you that you're playing that supporting role, and it's a pretty decent support medium tank. So that's it for the second gameplay. We're now going to head on into the third one. Welcome to the third and final game of today's video, and we're here on Mountain Pass. It's a team destruction battle, and we're going to show what you can do even when you aren't fully upgraded and you play a slightly more aggressive style in the Tiran 4. I'm going to do the crosshair across the middle of this map and get towards the northwestern side and see if I can spot out towards the north for my teammates that are sat behind me. Anyone coming over this ridgeline is going to get obliterated, and we spot a heck of a lot of enemies there across from us, and we're getting some nice assistance and damage for ourselves. And this is just me trying to maximize the amount of XP that I'm getting from this battle, keeping vision up on these enemies. I'm not always firing when I'm popping up. I'm just trying to keep these enemies lit, get as much assistance as possible, and try and get this grind done. At this point I was trying to get the fully upgraded radio and engine, I believe, and yeah, it's just a way of trying to excel the grind, make it a little bit quicker and a little bit easier, and then once I'm fully upgraded, the grind goes nice and quickly. You can see here that 6 degrees of gun depression on a fairly steep ridge is very difficult to use. You've got to sort of expose a large portion of your tank. I'm sat here side on in the hope that the enemies, as I pull back, will shoot across my upper hull and hit an auto ricochet angle, and I'm just trying to bait people into trying to fire at my turret, and then when I know they fired, pop up, snap a shot in, and then get back. But we're continuing to get some very nice assistance damage as we pop up. Going to try and see if we can take out this pesky light tank to the left of us. The Leopard prototype is coming towards the left, so we're going to have to watch out for him using the third-person camera and the True Vision system. And it's all about rinsing and repeating in this position. There's no need to move. We still have a nice line of defence behind us. And at this moment in time, we'll be in the support for our team. We're getting the vision out for the tanks that have the better guns behind us. And we're having a relatively nice impact here. You see there, we tried to free aim that shot as we should have on that M41A1, but I believe we might have hit a ridge, our gun might have bumped up or down, and unfortunately for us that means we do take a few shots of damage. I make a massive hash of whatever I was trying to do there, but we still have enough hit points left to see if we can help take this game down. We're now up to 2.2k direct damage and 2.4k assistance, and games like this are beautiful for the grind. You're going to get a nice amount of XP. We are the ones as far forward as possible, which means that we're going to be getting more experience for being closer to the enemies, and if we're able to, shooting the higher tiered Era 1 tanks will give us more XP as well and enhance our grind. Just being in that position there, getting our view range out, getting the occasional shot in, and being that kind of slash support and vision for our team has helped take this one down. And now we can go all in on this FE4005, get a bit of ramming damage, get a shot through the 15mm of armour that thing has on its barn of a turret, take him out, and it's just one tank destroyer left. And yeah, in a relatively short space of time there, we had a nice impact. And that's the kind of things you're going to want to do in the Tiran 4. You can play that supporting role when you feel confident of certain positions, play slightly more aggressively, use your armour as effectively as possible, try and get as much assistance and bounce as much as possible. And yeah, the grind is pretty decent. This tank isn't too bad. The gun depression can be very annoying, as can be the shell velocity and the standard penetration for a newer player and even for more experienced players. But the grind isn't too long, and you'll get to the Tiran 5SH, which looks like it's a substantially better tank. But I hope that some advice here was useful to you in the Tiran 4, and it's interesting to see the comparison of all these middle era, Era 1 medium tanks. Thank you all so much for your support, and until next time, I'll see you on the battlefield, and bye for now.